Let's take a sec here. Thank you, Cindy. And I think we're in good shape here. Looks. Let me make sure everybody gets on with audio. A couple more. And again, welcome you and thank you for joining us today. All right. I think we'll go ahead and get rolling, and we'll keep an eye out for anybody else who might hop on with us. I'll go ahead and start our intro. Thanks to those of you who are using your cameras. I always appreciate being able to see a few faces. This reminds me of that. I think I may have mentioned it to you or to some other group lately. You want to reinforce people who when they're presenting. If you have eye contact with people, those are the people who you play to. Those are the people who you focus on, because that's where you're experiencing the reaction. You've probably seen that in classroom settings if you've been in a classroom setting, and the people who are teaching or presenting will focus on the folks that who give them some feedback with some expression. So it's always good to be able to see some people. All right, so we are at number 8 out of 8 with our tools for empowering teams. So today we're going to spend some time with another tool. This is our disclaimer. The opinions expressed by me are not necessarily the opinions of SAMHSA. And always being mindful of stigma and language, always trying to focus on person first language, that people are people first, and that they are not there any conditions or symptoms that they may have don't represent who they are as people. It's a portion of who they are. And so how do we try to make sure we use language, and to always be mindful of our language, and to always be trying to help each other to be respectful and to reduce stigma. And in terms of receiving technical assistance, if you want to make a request, you can submit a TA request, which will be reviewed. And then a plan can be developed for delivering that technical assistance to you from the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. And to just kind of remember, related to muting, you all don't need this drill because you've been managing it quite successfully for 7 of the 8. I don't imagine anything's going to go off the rails today. So you all know how to manage. So what we've been doing is talking about these tools, having some interaction around a tool, try to encourage you to try these things either during when we're talking about them or after, in between our meetings. My hope is that you've had a chance to explore some of these tools a little bit. I'm always welcome to any conversations with any of you. I'll put my email in the chat again. Do that right now. And if you have a situation where you're trying any of these tools, or have a challenge you're trying to address, or doing some planning, or trying to sort something out, you're not sure what tool you should use, I'm always excited to have chats with folks about that, if I can be supportive. So feel free at any point to shoot me an email and say, here's a question I have. Can I use this to do that? Or what could I use that would help me and my team to sort out this situation? If there's a way that you could benefit from some dialogue around that, I'm always happy to do that. And usually my answer is not, if you have problem X, you should use tool Y. It's usually a little more like, well, what exactly are you trying to do there? Well, you could kind of do this, or maybe you could do that. And so it's usually a couple of different possibilities. And there are different tools that can do similar things. And so sometimes the challenge is sorting out kind of which one's the best fit for you. So that's the stuff that we could always talk about. So as you know, we've been working our way through these 3 parts of our series: knowing your partners, knowing your environment, your organization, and then knowing your plan. So we've been talking more about planning. In our most recent conversation, we talked about nominal group a couple of weeks ago. Last week, we talked about that 2x2 matrix, how to use that tool. And then today I want to talk about Gantt charts. And all, as always, if anyone, oh, I see from Sandra, is anyone else having an issue with my volume? How's my volume for people? Is it okay? It's okay? All right. Okay, so Sandra fixed it. Got it. All right, good. No problem at all. I'm glad you asserted it. Sandra, you're role modeling the exact behavior that I'm always encouraging, which is speak up and say what you need and talk about what you're experiencing. So right on. Perfect. So So today we're going to talk about the Gantt chart. I do want to pause and see if anyone has any questions, comments about last week or any of our previous tools as we get started talking about this one. Anything that anyone would like to share, either in the chat or out loud? Not hearing any. Oh,
I
wait.
really enjoyed the 2 by 2 matrix diagram that you shared. I try to utilize it in more areas than I would have normally before. So
Uh-huh.
it's been very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear that. It's simple, and once you get dialed into it, it's sort of a way of seeing things. It's sort of, for me, it's like a mental model that I carry around all the time. That tool I use a lot. Like, well, there's a couple of things happening here. It's high and low in that, it's high and low in that, which is it? And it's just a nice way to organize your thinking in a simple, clear fashion. So I'm glad to hear, Diana, that you found it helpful. Yeah, that's good. All right. Anybody else? Feel free. So Christina saying you appreciated the 2 by 2. You can use it personally and professionally. These have all been great tools. Yeah, that's a good reminder, Christina. Thank you for that. Which is, our focus has generally been on work-related use of tools, and we've had several examples as we've been talking about how they can be used not just in work but in personal as well. If you're trying to organize something that's related to your personal life, or sort out something or figure something out related to your family experience, that these tools are ways of organizing thinking. They're not categorical. It's not organizing only this kind of thinking or thinking in those kinds of questions or environments. They're universal. They can be applied anywhere. So absolutely use them. And I encourage people to test out tools. The best way to get comfortable and to get proficient with tools is to use them over and over, right? The tools that I'm really good at and can use really effectively are tools that I keep using over and over so I can understand where they can work, how they can be helpful, and where they might not be the best fit, right? That's an important part to think about as well. So yeah, practicing them is really a good idea. Okay, so Gantt charts. Let's talk about Gantt charts. Okay, true disclosure. How many of you, when you hear the name Gantt chart, start to get intimidated? Like, oh, those are complicated. I don't know if I want to do those. Um, I'll say that that was my original experience in relation to Gantt charts, because sometimes you see Gantt charts that are seriously complicated. I don't know if you know, there's different softwares that you can use that are Gantt charting software. And some of you are saying, I don't even know what a Gantt chart is. What are you talking about? And we'll get there in a second. So sometimes this is a tool that you can find if you were to Google Gantt charts and look at a bunch of them, you would say, wow, that's not something that I'm familiar with. That's really looks complicated. This is the case with a lot of different tools. You can do them in different ways and in different styles. There are some Gantt charts that are very detailed, the kind that we can use when we're talking about working in human service environments, doing the kinds of work that you all do, is one style. It's different than if you're, manufacturing software. I mean, companies that manufacture complicated products like software, I mean, they have Gantt charts that are, to me, they're kind of scary because they're so complicated and so detailed, and things are like measured down to the minute. Well, maybe not the minute, but really tight details and complexities and all the different variables. And so, but that's not what we need for our environment, right? That's not what we need when we're doing human service kinds of supports or peer services and supports. We need something that's a more kind of broad, more basic structure. So as we enter into a conversation about Gantt charts, I want to encourage you that what we're really talking about is who does what when. That's the way that I like to think about what Gantt charts are. Gantt charts are a way to visually represent who does what when, right? So this is a simple version of a Gantt chart. It's got the who, which is the the task and the staff related to it. In this case, the what is also there. We kind of have stuff that happens across time. That's the when through the weeks. So the way that a Gantt chart generally functions is for planning purposes when we're trying to do something that's complex, like move your office, start a new service, uh, onboard new staff, right? Things that require a bunch of steps that are done by multiple people across time. If you have a team of people who are trying to coordinate a complicated thing that happens across time and where different people do different things at different parts of that process. Like I start by doing my part and then I hand it to you and you do your thing and then you hand it back to me and I do my thing and then it goes to so and so who does the next part, right? The Gantt chart is designed to visually represent that. So we can put the whole thing on a nice grid and kind of map it out and know how it evolves across time. So let me just take a minute to share something about that. Um, as we think about all the elements of this, and then we'll kind of talk about how maybe some of you have used them or might be able to use them. So let's think about these details, right? So let's start with the different elements. So what do we need to do? What are the tasks? So anything that's complicated that you do has multiple tasks, right? That's what we mean by complexity. We're not talking about simple things like, I have to remember to pick up milk on the way home. That's not complex, right? You can still forget it. I mean, I forget those things often, right? It's still forgettable and you can still mess it up. That's for sure the case, but it's not complicated. It doesn't have multiple variables and multiple things happening across time. It doesn't require a Gantt chart. It's singular and simple. Or something that's really short term, like if you're doing something and it's a day activity, it doesn't require a Gantt chart. It might require a list or a sequence or an agenda, right? We have agendas for meetings. Meetings don't require Gantt charts. They do require an agenda, a list of things so that we don't forget, because we have 5 things we want to do in the meeting. Let's make a list or an agenda to make sure that we do all 5 of those things. Gantt charts are usually for things that take longer and have more complicated tasks, that have different parts to them. So we have a list of things that we need to do that are part of this bigger agenda, right? Something like I was saying before, like hiring people or onboarding people or starting a program or moving or something like that that's kind of bigger and more complicated. So then there's the when. When do we need to do it? Is there an order? Is there a sequence? Most complicated things have a sequence, right? Think about certain kinds of things that you've had to learn, right? There's a sequence to learning it. First, you have to learn this part, and then once you've learned that part, then you can move on to the next part. Um, are there certain lengths to the amount of time that's required, or do certain parts of the process take longer than other parts? If you think about something complex that you might do, you know that some parts are really short and quick, but then other parts are long and complicated and have a lot of time involved. So what's the time frame as we're trying to do something? And then there's the who does each part, right? So here I represented the people as the different letters. Now I also included different colors here to represent different activities. But think about in your team, if you're trying to do something complicated, it's probably more than just one person who's involved, right? It may be everybody who works on your team who's a part of it. So if it's just you doing a project, you might not need a Gantt chart because you can just make a list for yourself. There's 6 things I have to do in this order. I don't really need a Gantt chart. It's just me, right? It's just a list. But if there's 4 people and we're all doing different things and we're coordinating and you have to do your thing and then I do my thing, well, we probably need to get organized. Otherwise, we might be really inefficient and we might waste time and we might get confused. Or I'm thinking that you're working on something so that I can have it back from you next week, but you're not working on it and I didn't know you're not working on it. So when Monday comes around and I say, "Can I have that thing?" and you say, "Oh, I'm doing that this week." And then I said, "Oh, shoot, I thought you were doing it last week, and now I can't do my thing because you didn't do your thing." So now Now we're going to be behind. Okay, a Gantt chart would have fixed that. It would have solved that. It would have given us a nice grid so that everybody's clear. Oh, you're doing that part here, so you're expected to do it here, and then I'm going to do my part after you're done. I see it here on the grid. So that will keep us all organized. So then back to that original picture, once we put those three variables of who and the what and the when together into a chart, we can say, what are the things that we have to do? Who's doing them? And when are they happening? So as I said here before, we can put the person's name in, the different name of who's doing what at each point in the map, and what is it that they're doing, and how does it move across time? So let me pause for a minute and have a first reaction. Has anyone ever used something like this? Has anyone ever, oops, sorry. Has anyone ever seen them in use or been a part of them being used? What are your first thoughts?
So I actually have used something like this before. I use it whenever I work alongside case managers. I'm a peer, so whenever we get referrals, we have like an Excel spreadsheet that's something like this, to where we put in there like who reached out to this client, what day, and what follow-up looks like. So that's kind of where it was implemented for me.
Yeah, that's a good example, Sandra. So you could have multiple people who are doing different activities, and there's a sequence to the activities, right? Somebody has to reach out to the person with this step before someone else can do that next step. That sequence is important. If you just cold call the person before I've had a chance to tell them that you're going to contact them, that might not go so well. We want to make sure that they're comfortable and ready. And since I have a relationship with them, I'm going to expect them to have contact, to hear from you and to have contact with you. And so they'll be more likely to be agreeable to that when you contact them. It's a simple sequence, but it's really critical to success, right? To be done in order. So what you just described is a good use of a Gantt chart. So that's also a good point you make, that it doesn't have to be 7 people or 10 people that we're talking about. It could be 2 people. It could be a small number of people who need to organize the sequence of their activities, because the sequence matters. In order to do it properly, it has to be done in a certain order. And the timing matters, sequence and timing, right? Um, so how long does it take to do the first part? Well, let me give you enough time to do that. You see some of these color bars on this slide are longer than others. Some things take more time, right? So as we're planning, part of the planning is to say, well, for Sandra, for example, okay, first you have to do this thing. How long does it take to do that, right? So how long should we put in here? So I won't do my thing until how long, because we have to know how long your thing takes. So this requires some communication. Sandra, how do you make these? Do the people get together to kind of to to sort it out or draw it up? How do you keep track?
So, between supervisors and case managers, we actually meet once a week to go over the list. But during the week, whenever like certain individuals are out, we at least know what was done with their particular role in the thing with the client, and what that looks like.
I see. Yeah, great examples. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really good example of how a Gantt chart can work. Let me ask other people, have you seen something like this, used something like this, worked in a team where people organized activities with some sort of a grid or a timeline of some sort? Who else has seen something like this?
So I teach in my other gig, I teach a class called Getting Ahead, and it's about poverty and homelessness and how to improve your situation. And in one of the modules, we teach about backward planning. So like you have a date when you have to have something done, and then working backwards. And I think this could work in backward planning too. Maybe.
Yeah,
I'd have to think about it.
yes, kind of backward planning, reverse engineering of the things that are, because so often we sort of end up, at the 11th hour saying, yipes, I've got to do all these things. Well, let's plan it backwards. What is the sequence? Especially if there's multiple parties involved in it, Stacy, then this would be particularly helpful to organize it,
Yeah.
and to kind of factor in all those time frames. That's a good point. Yeah. I see that Darlene added a comment in around using a Gantt chart to schedule cleaning duties at a daycare center. Um, yeah, so that's interesting. So you could have, there's the difference between a simple schedule for duties, like these people do these things on these days, or just a schedule of staff, these people work these hours on these days, and the difference between that and a Gantt chart is the Gantt chart has kind of connectivity between the elements. There's usually a sequence to things. So this thing has to happen before that thing. And so you have to do this first. As it relates to cleaning, for example, there are things that sometimes have to happen in sequence. If so and so doesn't do that, then you can't do this. And so the Gantt chart model makes sense, right? So this has to happen before that has to happen. Somebody has to, clean up this mess before I can do the floors, obviously, because if there's stuff all over them, I can't do them. So again, sequence. So how long does it take to do that? And then what has to happen before I can do the next part? Is that was there stuff like that involved with it, Darlene? I don't know if Darlene's
Yes,
able to.
hold on, sorry. I
No,
can
you're
get
good.
my camera to work, but yes. Yes, it came in really helpful. The
Good.
chart, because you could actually see was doing what duties were assigned to whom,
Mhm.
and the times. So
Yeah.
it was,
Good. That's good. And thank you for sharing that. It's a really good tool. Again, as we've been talking about these tools, we've been talking about how they help you to complete certain tasks. And that secondary feature we've been talking about is how they help with team building, how they help people to work with each other, to work in partnership toward the same goal. And so if everyone has a collective visual of a sequence, we all have the same expectations, the same assumptions, the same understanding. We all know that person C during weeks 2 through 4 is working on that certain thing. And we know that that's happening. We're all aligned with each other. And so there is much less likelihood that we will have confusion and surprises and miscommunications. We still will, because that's just the nature of being humans and interacting with each other. Things will get confused. But we will have minimized that quite significantly if we use some kind of chart like this. And we'll pull people together and get people working together and feeling like they're part of something bigger. The sharing of a Gantt chart says to you, you have a task, and your task is important, and your task is a part of something bigger. Think about how much more motivated you are when you know that what you're doing is part of something bigger. Think about jobs that you may have had. One job where someone says, you're just going to do this. Don't worry about what the rest of us are doing. You just go do your thing. As compared to a boss who says to you, you're doing your thing, which is really important, because if your thing isn't here, then this thing can't happen. And then I'm not able, or someone else is not able to do this. So what you're doing is critical to helping this bigger product or this bigger service to be delivered. Much more meaningful. You have a much more meaningful sense of your role when you can see the big picture, and how what you do is in partnership with what other people do. So that's I think that's a theme with all of our tools, right? If you can use a tool as a team, you create alignment, you create a sense of purpose and meaning, and you create much better unity in your group as people try to work on something together. What else? Have other people seen this tool or have any reactions to it, or using a chart like this? Have you seen it anywhere else, or where might you use it? Does anybody have a thought on where you might try this?
So I was thinking, when I'm writing grants, there's always a point where they want a timeline of what's going to happen, like how we're going to get started and get everything set up. So I think that this would be something I could use. when I'm writing a grant and having to come up with that plan.
Absolutely. A simple table with a Gantt chart, and you can write it as in a table. You can write it in Excel. It's really nice in Excel. You just use the cells and then just maybe merge a few if something's longer, that kind of thing. Just create a nice grid in Excel. It's pretty simple to do, and it's an excellent way to show that process. Much better than a simple timeline, because simple timelines really don't allow you to comfortably describe the different people doing different things. You can put it on a timeline, but it's a little less clear, and it gets a little fuzzy, because then you're putting multiple variables on the timeline at the same point. Person X will do Y during weeks 2 through 4. Well, you don't need to say all those words here. It just shows, right? Because we've mapped it in a way that makes it obvious. So it's superior to a timeline in that way. Timelines are good for just simply reflecting on a sequence of events in a simple term, when you don't need the other details, right? And so if you don't need other details, then don't use something more complicated, because then it just busies it up in a way that's not necessary. If you do need the details, as per some of these things we're talking about, like planning, then this grid is really helpful. So thanks for that, Stacy. Hoyt saying, for planning to roll out new workflows or processes, who needs to prep what, develop the workflow, prep PowerPoint slides, script, film, and post-production videos, schedule trainings for various teams. Yeah, Hoyt, this is a really good tool for that sequence. It meets exactly the criteria that would indicate Gantt chart is useful, because you have complexity, you have multiple activities. Some of them are longer than others. Some of them are quick. Some of them are quite complex. And there are multiple parties doing different things, right? Somebody probably does more than one of these things. Somebody else does some of the other elements. And so a Gantt chart is really well suited for what you're describing. So yeah, I would recommend it. And maybe, Hoyt, if you could share with us, have you used any kind of a organizing tool for doing the work that you're talking about with that kind of a workflow? How have you organized it so far? Could you share that with us?
I use essentially a spreadsheet, much like your diagram here shows.
Yeah.
I have used, what is in the world is it called? The Microsoft tool for actually creating Gantt chart kinds of things and
Yeah.
scheduling.
Yep.
But we also use things like to-do list and
Mhm.
those sorts of things. And then
Yeah.
we just put them all on a calendar and
Sure.
schedule them all.
Yeah.
But it comes in helpful when we have to identify dependencies. And so just doing the structure and the discipline of plotting things out can identify that number 3 probably can't start then. It needs to wait until whatever is done. And so creating dependencies and identifying them is another use for this tool.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate you sharing, and your thoughtfulness about it. You just reminded me of this quote from President Eisenhower that I saw not that long ago, where he said, plans once you're in battle are relatively useless. The second part of the quote is, planning for battle is essential.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Yeah, so that's a good quote. So whatever we're doing, whatever struggle or thing we're trying to figure out, if once it starts to happen, there will be some chaos and some twists and turns,
Always are.
and our plan doesn't unfold the way we expected it would. But if we didn't have that plan and hadn't done all that thinking about those contingencies and possibilities, and created a sequence and understood who would be doing what and when they'd be doing it, we would be in really rough shape once things start to get a little chaotic.
One of the things I've told my daughters when they were getting married, you have to plan all the weddings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all nervous and that kind of stuff. And I look at them and I say, you know what? Once it starts, it's going to be what it's going to be. And at the end of it, you'll be married. Don't
Right.
sweat.
That's right. Right. That's right. Yes, well said. Yeah, so these are good ideas and guidance related to how you can use Gantt charts. Again, same components that we were describing: multiple people, multiple activities across time. And so organizing the who does what when in some visual fashion. As Hoyt was saying, use a spreadsheet. People will draw, they'll put something up on a big board, so that everybody in the program can keep an eye on as things move across time. I think spreadsheets are particularly good for this. I mean, there's a lot of different softwares that actually are designed for creating Gantt charts. Some of them I think are more complicated than you need to have in order to do this well, because as I said, we're not manufacturing software. And so we don't have those really tight constraints and multiple really complex details to a process. We can, I think, just use a simple grid like this as a table like this to represent the sequence effectively. So I don't like for complexity of tools to be inhibiting, to make people feel like, well, I can't really do this because I don't want to have to buy and learn that software. In this case, you really don't need to do that. You can keep it simple and be quite effective. And I've seen people do amazing and even very complex Gantt charts with a spreadsheet as they start to do more and more complicated activities and they need more complexity. You can do that in a sheet without any problem. And you can add notes and text as you need to for further details as is needed, depending on what you're doing. Oh, right. MS Project was what Hoyt was saying, the name of the software. So if some of you are familiar with Microsoft suite of tools, and MS Project being one that you can use to develop Gantt charts, because it's a project planning software, so it's designed to do this work. So that's an option for people if they're interested in exploring that. Any other comments or thoughts about this as we're exploring it, about how you might use it or what might be a fit for you, or questions or things that you might be trying to plan? Anybody trying to do something new that's complicated, that involves multiple people, that's going to occur across time?
Could you use it in developing like your 3-year plan or 5-year plan?
Yeah, interesting. Typically, I think Gantt charts work well when it is sort of concrete, discrete projects. In that case, we're talking about goal-based, maybe a kind of goal-based orientation. And so you might not have enough predictability there. I think where you might use the Gantt chart related to your multi-year plan would be in relation to the various elements of the plan. Like, we intend to concentrate on A, B, and C during year one. Well, A, B, and C each might use a Gantt chart, because Gantt chart gets us to that more detailed level of activity. It's less of a tool for kind of broader, more general, which is, we want to grow our program, right? Well, growing your program is a broad aspirational goal. So we have a particular thing we're going to do to grow the program, which is to do community outreach. Okay, community outreach can have a Gantt chart, because it's going to be multiple people doing multiple things across time that need to be done in sequence, right? So that's at the level at which the Gantt chart will make sense for us, as we operationalize that bigger goal with a particular project. So think about it as project level, right? So big plans will usually involve multiple project level things, right? Our plan for this year is to do these things. Okay, there are several projects. Each project could have a chart. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Great question.
Thank
That's a
you.
really good question. Yeah, that's that altitude question. We've done that with some of these tools, like, how, is this a tool for way up here? Is this a tool for closer to the ground with the details? So this one's kind of in that middle zone, right? In terms of the detail level of it. So any other comments or questions? All right. Well, I want for us to maybe wrap up there. I want to encourage you to think about where you can use a Gantt chart. And I want to reflect on our broader process, since today is our last conversation in our series. You all have just done a great job of bringing your comments, your questions, your motivation, your energy, your sharing about your own experiences to all of these tools. I've been very impressed with that, and willingness and openness to learn. The folks who effectively learn and use tools are folks who come to the table with a certain humility and openness and willingness to try and practice and do new things. That's how people develop new tools and progress toward their goals. And you all have been really modeling that to me as we've been talking and sharing and expressing your questions and suggestions for how you can try to use these things. So I've just been really appreciative of this. Sometimes when I teach tools, I try to engage in dialogue with groups, and they don't really. It's more challenging because they're more interested in more of a passive learning process where I'm kind of giving information, and that's always a little frustrating for me because I always prefer the dialogue and the engagement with people, because I always think, well, if it's just going to be me talking, why don't I just write it down and give it to you? Because that's the interaction is where we learn stuff together. The interaction is where we figure things out. And I want to really appreciate you all for making that happen, because it doesn't happen just because I invite you to share. You have to be willing and motivated um, and sometimes courageous enough to do it, right? So um, I just want to appreciate you all for doing that. And I think, let me ask Cindy. Cindy, do we have anything in terms of surveys that we need to make sure anybody does?
Yes, thanks, Matt. And hi, everyone. Yeah, you're going to get a follow-up email. And what we're going to do, we have recorded all of these. We're going to package them, and it has a PDF, much like what Matt's been sharing on the slides. And we'll package it all, put it on our website. So that'll be available. And I'm doing my best to get you certificates. I have no trouble putting the certificates together. It's just figuring out how many hours you guys were all here throughout the 8 sessions. So it might take me a little bit of time to do that, but there will be a follow-up email, and it will have an evaluation on this whole series. And we'd really love, love, love to hear from all of you and see what you think. It helps us fund future resources and tells Matt how wonderful he is.
Oh, there you go. Don't mind hearing that. Cindy and Chris also, thank you. Chris isn't able to be joining us today. Of course, Cindy and Chris are the organizers and the production behind this activity. So without them, none of this happens, as you know, and that's how you get these experiences and these opportunities to engage with us and with each other. So great thanks to Cindy and Chris for all of that work. And great thanks again to all of you. Really appreciate you all for all of your sharing. And I strongly encourage you to try some of these tools, give them a try. And if you try them and you're thinking, I don't really know how this thing works, or I'm not sure how to do this, just shoot me an email, ask me a question. As I said, I love to get those emails. I really do, because it just means to me that people are practicing and trying to do things, and that it helps you to pursue the mission that you do, and your mission is important to you, and it's important to me too. I really love and respect what you all do, and love and respect peer support and peer services as just a critical, valued resource for people in your community. So whatever I can do to try to help you to do what you do makes me feel good too. So I'm always happy to do that. So thank you all very much, and I hope I get to talk with you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.